One of the biggest gaps you will find every single time is ownership. Who does what? And who thinks who is responsible for what? Because 9 times out of 10, someone is assuming that someone else is doing something that they have no clue they're supposed to be doing.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line, where infection stops and information starts. You're listening to a special combined season of First Case and Transmission Control podcasts, bringing perioperative practice and infection prevention together to tackle one of healthcare's most persistent challenges, surgical site infections. Each episode will connect you with frontline staff, perioperative leaders, infection preventionists, and healthcare innovators sharing real-world strategies, stories, and solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, and from surveillance data to safer practice, we're breaking down silos and strengthening the systems that protect surgical patients. Welcome to Silo-Free Surgery.
Hello and welcome back to a special combined season of the Transmission Control and First Case podcast. It's all about surgical site infection reduction. And today we're meeting with Crystal Heishman to talk about the dynamics we build between IP in the operating room, a process improvement that actually sticks, and areas of the SSI reduction picture that we may not be thinking about as often as we should. We'll be right back after a brief word from our sponsors.
Brought to you from the studios of Healthcare HQ, let's get into it. This is Transmission Control.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of a special season combined between Transmission Control for our infection preventionists and public health experts and First Case for our OR personnel, team members as surgical technologists. And today, we're going to be talking with Crystal Heishman about the topic of surgical site infections and elements that we may not consider when we're looking at the OR environment, when we're looking at IP practices. And so, Crystal, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, and we're glad to have you. You're kind of a unicorn in a couple ways, and I say that in the best way possible, that you are somebody whose clinical experience has gone through IP, sterile processing, the OR, and it's not very often that we find people with all of those credentials behind your name. So do you mind walking us through your career, your path in healthcare?
Mm-hmm. So my career pathway is much like my stories. I like to go in a roundabout way to make the point. So I actually started off in IT and marketing before I got into nursing back in the day. So that's helped kind of shape the way I think. So I think more in a systems and behavior, not just task-based. My background, of course, in infection prevention has been a lot of fun and a lot of different experiences. And it's helped me connect processes to more than a checklist. You get to see all kinds of different connections and whatnot. So I've been working across orthopedics, neurosurgery, open heart, oncology, vascular access. It just gives you a different perspective, and you notice that there's risks and they look different in every space, but they're all there.
Now, that's interesting because how has your practice and approach been shaped by seeing all those different segments? Usually somebody sees one or maybe two of those segments of healthcare, but you've seen a pretty wide range, including the IT, which I didn't know about. So when you're rounding, do people ever ask you, hey, I need help with my computer, and you're able to reset it for them?
Yes, and usually it's, did you turn it off and turn it back on?
Yeah, the golden
standard response. Yeah. But yeah, it helps to have that background and those different experiences because you do get a different perspective. You're not seeing things from a singular experience. It's from a collection of events. So things that other folks may not notice, it may actually catch your eye because you've seen it before or you've experienced it.
I think that's very helpful. So in addition to all of your other credentials, you recently earned your CNOR, and I'm curious what prompted you to pursue that, and how has it further shaped your perspective?
So the CNOR was about credibility, and I wanted to fully understand the whole scope of the OR environment as the same level as the teams I'm working with. And I do have experience within the OR setting, mostly on the peripheral with infection prevention. Because when you're asking teams to look at their practices or change their practices, you have to understand the why behind what they're doing. And so the CNOR was very helpful and helped strengthen that.
I'm curious, have you noticed a shift in the dynamic with the teams since obtaining that credential?
Yes, we've been working on that for a little bit, and I'm very fortunate that my counterparts, we're all on the same team. We are all very complimentary of each other. We can step into each other's roles as needed. Actually, my counterpart here was one of the first people who ever taught me about high-level disinfection.
Really?
So, yes. And so it's been a great experience working together and building those relationships.
That is awesome. So kind of a full circle moment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, going to our season theme, surgical site infection reduction requires collaboration between infection prevention and the OR teams. And one of the themes that's come up a number of times, and our audience has heard it throughout this season, is breaking down silos between those two groups. But I want to talk about a concept that not siloing, but specialization. And so I want to get your perspective on specialized IPs who are just over the OR. They look at all surgical site infections. That's where they round. Is that a benefit? Are there risks to that? What are your thoughts on that?
I think there are benefits and risks to everything.
Sure.
I do believe
IPs
that,
if we didn't see it that way, right?
Right. The OR is its own unique, what's the word I'm looking for? It's almost like its own little domain.
Yeah.
It is different. So. Its flora is different than the rest of the healthcare facility. And they have their own customs and their own ways of doing things. So I think it's really important to have someone who can blend into that environment, understand the workflows, and then also help find those deviations in practice, because that's what we're really here for, is to help break down barriers and standardize processes for safety. The other piece of that is when you've looked at something for so long, sometimes you miss the little things because you're so used to seeing them. So some of those deviations that slip in may become the norm.
That is very true. It's you kind of become nose blind to it. Like I think it was the Febreze commercial. And, the other way I've seen that play out is some barriers just can't be moved. So, or they can't be moved right now. So the team sees an issue, they know it's an issue, and maybe they've mitigated the risk to some extent. But once we're accustomed to that, then that risk just kind of stays there. And we always want to encourage people go back to those risks, whether it's every year or every 6 months, and really reevaluate if something's changed, because we don't want these going like 5 and 10 years, especially if you're like you said, accustomed to it and you're seeing it every day. Now, for sites that may not be lucky enough to have a dedicated IP to in the OR and working in the OR, how would you encourage IPs to spend more time in the OR? Where should they start?
They should start by just watching, making friends, introducing themselves. The greatest place to set up shop in the beginning is to sit at the control desk.
Okay.
You get a very comprehensive view of the inner workings of the OR from that vantage point, and you can see the movement. So I would get with the control desk to kind of start that, make them your friends, because you're going to meet the surgeons through them. You're going to meet your scrubs, your circulators, your leadership. EVS, you're going to meet everybody from the control desk.
I like that. That's such a great idea, because it's the central hub where everything's happening in the OR that day. And we hear this from time to time where there's almost a split in dynamic. And I think it adds to that siloing where IP says, I want to go in and watch a case, and the surgeon doesn't want me in there. Have you seen that before, or seen good ways to overcome that?
Yes, it's happened to me as well. And so
people will be relieved to hear that. They're like, if it's happening to Crystal and it's happened to Crystal, we're going to be okay.
So one of the things that I've done is when approaching the surgeons, I approach it in a way where, hey, I want to sit in on this surgery today. So I don't quite give them a chance to say no. But on the same token, like, if you choose the smaller or the simpler surgeries before the more complex, long surgeries, you're going to get your foot in the door.
Okay.
So some of those surgeries that don't take a long time or that are minimally invasive even, those are helpful in getting your rapport with the team so that when you show up and they start seeing your face more often, it's not something that's triggering an alarm saying, hey, there's an IP in my room. It's like, oh, they're just here today.
They're just here. It's routine at that point.
It's routine. So you're developing a routine as you go along.
I like that. And are there other kind of tips or advice you would give for IP? I hope we all know, or I think we all know, don't touch anything blue. You know, you're not scrubbed in, so don't touch it. And don't even go close to it, because you can see when we, go too close or go from one part of the room to the other that, everybody kind of tenses up a little bit. So what other advice would you give for IPs when they're in the procedure?
When they're in the procedure, I would say stay in a corner if possible, unless you do have OR experience, and then, you can offer assistance wherever. But I would stay in a corner. A lot of your bigger ORs, they'll have like a computer desk where there's somebody who's charting during the case. Sit behind them. So then people aren't walking around you. They're walking in front of that area. Don't move. Don't touch anything. Do not touch anything.
Scratch your nose. Don't sneeze.
Right. Just sit there. Don't lock your knees if you're standing up, because no one wants to deal with that when you pass out. And usually you can find, as you make friends in the OR, you're going to find your allies and, your friendly faces. So you can come in with a scrub. They'll walk through the process with you. If you come down to sterile processing and walk through that process, they're going to be upstairs in the OR anyway at some point. So you can come in through the OR that way.
Great idea. And I'm curious to get your perspective, because it's been my experience where usually there's things for us to look at, especially at the start and the end of the case. You can see setup, you can see skin prep especially, you can see room turnover and breakdown. During the case is, I think, where I've struggled the most, because I don't know how the surgery, I don't know if it's going well, I don't know if they're, outside of the obvious things. So is there value in an IP watching the whole procedure? And if they are, what should they be looking for?
So I always think there's a value of watching the whole procedure. And as you go through, you don't have to know the procedure. It's just like when we're doing audits for accreditation or risk, we're looking at risks. The one thing I always look for is deviation.
Okay.
What is changing in between the players, in between the surgeons, in between the setups? So you don't have to know the surgery, you just have to know the routine. So what you're looking for is a routine throughout the different procedures.
That seems like it would help as you've seen more cases and seen a variety of surgeons and teams working, that you can say, hey, Dr. Bob does this, but you do this. Can you explain why that is to help me learn or educate me on this? Because there may likely be best practices happening in one room that haven't quite been adopted in another room.
Correct. And it could be something as simple as this surgery ends up having more traffic flow through it because they think it's a harder surgery. I know that somebody said it before, like one surgeon did this different method, and they had like a little pie crust method. And even though they had like this similar surgical volumes, that surgeon's infection rate was like a lot lower than everyone else's. Not that anybody else was overly high, but that one piece was the major deviation between all of them. They worked the same, their flow was the same, their surgical equipment was the same, but it was this one little piece that made the difference.
So explain that a little bit more to me, because I'm not familiar. What do you mean pie crust method?
So they created their own compound. I don't know how to describe it. They used a couple of, I don't even know exactly what to call it, but it had an antimicrobial component to it, and they placed it on the surgical wound for a certain amount of time. Okay. That was the only difference.
Wow.
The only difference. Whereas another time we were watching some spinal surgeries, and those who were using a certain antimicrobial powder were, had a higher rate of dehiscence, which was unexpected.
Right.
And so that was one of our findings from doing the observations.
I'm glad you brought that up too, because that may not be something that you're going to automatically see when you're doing abstraction. You have to do the gimbal walk and go to the space where it's happening to make an observation like that.
Correct.
Now, from your OR kind of side of your brain here, what makes a successful, I'll say like post-procedure report with the IP? What do you want to see as an OR leader? What information do you want to be getting from IP after they're in your room?
So if we're looking at the process, like the surgical process, and they're like, okay, so what did you see? What could we change? I think just being open, very transparent, saying, hey, I saw this. I'm not sure if this is a thing, but I'd like to watch more to see if there's any deviations in this practice. Especially when you talk about point of use, or if you talk about the way the back tables might be set up, or the way the surgical field, like if they're bringing in instruments in the middle of the case for a second piece of the procedure.
Yeah.
So those are things that you would want to know from your IP is, hey, what did you really see? And how do we compare?
Because they may be saying different things than you do when, hey, my boss is in the room, they're watching this case.
And OR leaders also want to hear IP say, hey, I noticed this. Do you need me to help connect to see if we can fix this? They love to hear that.
I like that. And leave it up to them. So present the information. I think one of the worst practices, I'll say, that I've seen is you're in the room, you don't talk to anybody. An hour later, the highest level leader that you can send an email to gets a report with just a laundry list of things. And one of the challenges is really saying whether those things are a big deal or not. And we don't want to we want to be mindful of everything, right? But how do we right size, hey, this is a big deal versus this is kind of garden variety stuff that we need to fine tune?
So I think just setting that expectation, even in the email communication, first having those conversations. So shouldn't have an email go out without an initial conversation to let them know something is coming. That's usually something that the folks appreciate if they have that prior notification. But I like to stoplight it. So these are okay, minor things, not a big deal. These are yellow light things that, hey, it could create a problem. So you may want to look into it. And the next so often we'll come back and look at it again. Or you have your red lights where like, hey, these are safety concerns that need to be addressed, within the next 7 to 14 days. And we're going to keep following up and see how we can help you fix these.
That's a great approach so that they know, hey, I've been made aware of this, and these are the prioritization that I can start working on. I like that.
Yeah.
And this is more kind of a side question, but it's something I'm always curious because, sterile processing, everybody kind of knows it's a thankless job in a lot of ways. My guess is that our circulators, surgical technologists, even the surgeon, they're not hearing thank you as often as they should. So is there a benefit to IP saying, hey, I noticed you did really well with this. Can we have some quick win things that, hey, thanks for doing that. It really makes a difference to the patient.
I think it makes a difference to hear thank you to everyone because no one hears it quite enough. Also, one of the biggest gaps within healthcare is that we like to work in silos.
Yeah.
And so this helps to unsilo those pieces and build those relationships. So, IP can be a really good place to start branching out and creating those networks of inclusion. And a little thank you will go a long way, especially in inviting you back or, in the trust factor or anything like that.
I like that. Great advice there. And in thinking of that network and everything that goes in and out of the OR, we talk a lot about instrumentation. We talk a lot about the big picture stuff. But one that I feel like doesn't get quite enough attention is the equipment in the room. And what's been your experience? And all about SSI reduction, but I feel like we don't pay enough attention to the nuts and bolts equipment, the Neptunes, the boom itself, cords on the floor. Are those elements that could be a risk factor for a patient getting an SSI?
Most certainly. Anything that can be touched can present a risk. So when we look at, most of the time we're looking like terminal cleaning, turnover cleaning, they're looking at stationary items for the most part. I really have a little more concern with the mobile equipment that move back and forth between the different OR rooms as needed, because sometimes those move before they should.
Yeah.
they move after. So like, let's say I did a terminal clean. The terminal clean is done for the evening, and all of a sudden the bed from the room that hasn't been terminally cleaned is now in the terminally cleaned room. Yeah. And it's assumed that the bed is clean because the room is signed off as being terminally cleaned. So looking at those mobile pieces, they play a big role in environment.
That's such a good call out too with our signage and how, because if we're assuming that the room is clean, we're also making maybe a bad assumption sometimes that everything in that room is ready to go and safe for the next patient. Mm-hmm. Makes you think about all of the positioning equipment. And when you walk through the OR, there's always a wire rack with and Crystal, tell me the right name of these, but they're like the jelly roll things that are, is that what they're actually?
They're the positioners.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so, they're just the rolls.
Yeah, and they're just kind of on a shelf, or they're sitting, or like you see a positioning pad sitting on the ground or really close to the ground. And how confident we feel that all of these things are getting cleaned and prepared for the next patient.
I am confident that someone is cleaning them somewhere.
So have you seen in your practice the best way to handle that division of labor with who cleans what? Some things, because we don't want to assume EVS is cleaning it if it's the OR's job or vice versa, or maybe it's an unassigned task out there.
Yeah. So my favorite thing to do is to pull everybody together and do a process mapping. And one of the biggest gaps you will find every single time is ownership. Who does what? And who thinks who is responsible for what? Because 9 times out of 10, someone is assuming that someone else is doing something that they have no clue they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And that includes the cleaning pieces. So unless there's an actual process down there, then you have gaps in your equipment processes.
What a great process. So you bring everybody in and you just go from start to finish with what everybody does?
Yeah. So with
cool.
point of use cleaning, we did a very high level overview of, from A to Z. And when you break it down step by step, you're looking at 300 and something steps. We did not have that many. We shortened it up a little.
Right.
But the looks on everyone's faces when they realize that this is not what they thought was happening, it was priceless. And as part of my process improvement pieces, we do exchanges and observations. So sterile processing is up in the OR with the scrub techs, and the scrub techs are in sterile processing watching those processes. And it's a real big eye opener because one, they have assumptions about a role and they're learning that those assumptions may not be correct, but they also see each other's practice deviations and they're in workflows. And they'll go, but why aren't we doing this?
Right.
Because we've always done it that way.
That is the golden question or the golden response. Right. We've always done it this way. So that's a great way to break through that barrier, because if the exchange is going both ways, then everybody probably feels a little bit less defensive about their own practices. They're expecting it.
Right. They start developing those relationships between departments. We have had surgeons come down to sterile processing and watch that and get a new appreciation for the life cycle of the instrument. Go back to the OR and watch that life cycle. And they usually come back and they're like, we cannot believe that you do all this manually. Yeah. Well, yes, we do. Especially with, sets that might have 200 instruments in them. But it just helps everyone just to have that minute of noticing what everyone else is doing. And addressing our own perceptions and biases. It's no different from, in nursing, and you're on the floor and you're oh, ICU did this, and ICU's the floor did this, and the ER's I ain't listening to either one of you.
Right.
So that's what I like to do, is bring everybody together.
I love that. So those exchanges to break down those silos, and really appreciate the work that everybody's doing, because nobody goes into work saying, I'm going to harm a patient today, or I'm going to do a bad job. No. Most everybody is functioning to the best of their training, to the best of their education, and to the best of the resources that are on the table.
Correct.
In terms of some of the project or process improvement projects that you worked on, there were a couple that we discussed that I just found awesome. So I want to take a minute to dive into those a little bit, because each one can really significantly impact your SSI. And what we always want to remind is SSIs are multifactorial. They're tough to have a silver bullet for. And very rarely are we going to say A happened and it resulted in B, and it happens every single time. A lot of times these are like, what's the full environment that this patient is going through? Mm-hmm. So one of those that you discussed was testing and using ATP testing in OR cleaning validation. So tell us a little bit about that and what some of the outcomes were.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways that we can do testing in the environment to determine if it's clean, quote unquote, mm-hmm. or if it's been touched at least. And so that could be in fluorescent marking. It could be ATP testing, little tiny hidden objects in places. At one mm-hmm. point we used glow germ, I think, on some of the items until we realized that it did stain a couple of things. So we had to change our method. There's a couple of little fluorescent marking dots out there mm-hmm. that can be used. But the ATP is what we ended up doing. And so what we looked at is we said, okay, so what does the IFU state? And the IFU, when you read it for the particular instrument we were using, said this is for food surfaces. This number is. Mm-hmm. We had found an article and it had a lower threshold. So we followed that and we said, okay, we want this cleaner than a food surface. So
pretty
then we brought
reasonable for the OR, right?
Right. So we brought our friends from EVS in and we said, okay, this is what we want to do. We retrained everybody on terminal cleaning at mm-hmm. the point, because when we were doing the initial testing, we got the Hawthorne effect from standing there.
Yeah.
And everything was wonderful. We also got the targeted cleaning effect. Mm-hmm. from knowing that it was being marked in a certain place. So ATP was a little different because we would change up randomly the objects that we would test.
Really? Okay.
So we did train like our supervisors and whatnot from our EVS partners on how mm-hmm. to do ATP testing. We took turns to make sure that we kept it fair. Mm-hmm. And if there was any major deviations, we brought our EVS folks who are dedicated to the ORs and procedural areas, brought them to the table to give feedback, and they were very, very invested. They would get like a 30 or something on their ATP testing, and they can go up to 100, and they were like, oh, I got to clean it again.
Nice.
And it was like, no, that's really good.
So some gamification of that too.
Right. So, and it was very incentivized. We gave out shout outs and kudos and made them feel like they were part of the team, which is sometimes lacking.
Yeah.
And so we got a great deal of ownership, and that's another gap is feedback, letting mm-hmm. folks see that downstream impact of their work. Infection prevention can definitely help connect those dots to help people understand why it matters. But yes, it was a great time relearning that process and getting everyone involved.
Yeah. Was there anything that surprised you? Think surfaces that maybe you would have thought were cleaner than they were, or even dirtier than they were, that surprised you?
Yeah, so like the what are they called? The bed belts or the straps.
Yeah.
Some are reusable, some are disposable in places. So determining if the strap was actually supposed to be remaining mm-hmm. or tossed. Sometimes those weren't cleaned as much because they were kind of off to the side.
Okay. That's a great one.
We did notice that where the equipment was in the room also affected the ATP score and the cleaning on that. So the farther away it was from the center of the field, mm-hmm. the higher the numbers would technically be.
Okay. That makes sense.
So we had to point out that, hey, no matter where the equipment is, it's still part of the surgical environment, and it could be in the surgical, it could be mm-hmm. moving closer. And so that really helped folks visualize as well.
That makes total sense when we think about that. But without that process, it would have been challenging to really identify objectively which of those areas were. Mm-hmm. Now, another one that we discussed was your approach to point of use treatment for instruments. And I think it's probably the best approach that I've ever heard with this. And so I want to make sure our audience hears it as well.
When we first start with the point of use process, mm-hmm. we are very hands-off. So we just watch and we observe and we ask questions. We start with the audit process. It is a great way for IP also to get their foot in the door and become that partner between surgical services and sterile processing and develop those relationships. So one of the things I like to do when we're in the very first midst of everything is we will do point of use audits at the point of use.
Okay.
So before it ever comes down to sterile processing, we do it there. And that way we can give direct feedback. We can say, hey, we noticed this. Is this one hard to clean? Is it something that like reamers are extremely difficult to clean?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, do you need a larger soak pan? How can we help you? Or do you have access to sterile water? It might be something as simple as getting with materials and having them either stock that closer or putting it on case card. So looking at those processes, they'll usually tell you if it's something difficult. Like maybe it's a loaner tray. Maybe the vendor wants to reset it and they took it off the field to reset it. And so nobody got a chance to do that point of use cleaning. But it's great when you can do it in real time. And if there's a major deviation in practice, then you can have you can have like a little group together and do your own mini like risk assessment, RCA kind of thing. Right then and there. So plenty of times I had called an OR director and sterile processing leadership and said, hey, I need you to meet me up here because this is looking a little different here. Not what we're expecting. And then the other piece is encouraging those up and down escalations. Mm-hmm. And so like if they're doing the point of use audit in sterile processing, being able to escalate that right back up to the OR. And knowing that it's being taken care of and vice versa. If there's something wrong with the tray, it's being taken care of.
So in that escalation process, what does that look like in practice? So a case cart comes down, it's a bloody mess, everything is dried on. Mm-hmm. What does the technician do and how does the OR respond?
Right. So typically if it looks kind of not great, the technician will escalate to their supervisor. And that'll kind of go up the food chain a little bit. And then, so let's say if it makes it to me, then I'll take it up to my counterpart. And then my counterpart will get her team together and they'll address it. Mm-hmm. If it's IP that's rounding and sees something, they'll escalate just as well. We've come a long way in communication. So it's generally well received.
Nice.
And usually there's some sort of something happening, whether maybe it's somebody brand new and they haven't learned the process yet.
Right.
And so they're just bringing their own experience with them.
Yeah.
So there's usually a good conversation there. It's not perceived negatively most of the time, just because they're so used to it. They know it's coming.
Right. And that's a cultural thing. Mm-hmm. There's so many departments that don't start auditing and reporting point of use treatment issues because they're worried maybe they'll upset the OR or vice versa. They'll upset SPD. And you can't really get to that point of acclimation if you don't start.
It's creating a routine.
I like that. Now, the last one I wanted to focus on is this process called training within industry. And tell us about that and how you're applying that to get, whether it's SSI reduction, whether it's, process improvement in other ways. But how does training within industry work with your team?
Mm-hmm. So training within industry, it's different because it translates the work into something that people can actually do consistently. So we're not re-educating anyone. Mm-hmm. What we're doing is we're translating what we should be doing into practice that can be repetitive. Mm-hmm. A policy or standard operating procedure, which is what we normally run by, it can tell you what to do, but that TWI breaks it down into the actual steps, gives you key points, and gives you the why behind each step. A lot of times we will tell folks to do things, but we don't explain the why. Mm-hmm. It's also hands-on. It's built into the workflow. It's not something that you review just once a year like a competency. It's repeating over and over. And it's to help reduce variation and you get more reliable practice. Mm-hmm. And it really shifts training from I signed off on it to this is just what I do.
Right. So when you guys are going through that process, you break the process. So let's say it's patient skin prep in the OR. Mm-hmm. You'll break down that process step by step with the why, so they know why they're doing that specific task. And then what outcomes have you seen from that practice?
Right. So our point of use process was actually in a TWI. So
Nice.
what we do from the beginning to the end of the case, all the way down through the auditing process and sterile processing with, let's see, what else do we do it on? We've done it on how we clean instruments in general. Sterilization we're working on right now, making sure that those steps go in the order they're supposed to and how we want that process to look. With some of our camera towers upstairs, we have written job descriptions like you plug it into this, and this is why. Do not yank on the cord because the pins are going to break. Even something simple as laser safety. That's not simple, but laser safety would go into a TWI, so you know the process and what happens if that process fails. So like if you have a fire or something like that, what to do. So everything, skin prep, letting it dry, applying it this way, and it just goes step by step, and people get to learn the why.
I love that because, it's very challenging to ask somebody to do something day in and day out without knowing the why behind it. And teams really respond to that.
In infection prevention, we do that a lot.
Yeah.
We kind of tell folks.
We say, just
things, do it. Right? PPE use. Here's your PPE. Use it. But why?
Right. And this builds a structure because you're going to get new whys or the same whys, same questions from new staff members when they come in, people coming from other hospitals or having had different training. And this TWI, this training within industry, answers that question that we put on recommendations all the time of like, hey, we saw this deviation. What are you recommending? Education. Well, that's great, but that's such a broad thing. So does this give your team the ability to say what we are recommending is this TWI?
It's a group of people who are working on a process and say, okay, out of all of our different work ways or workflows, this is how we want this to be replicated every single time. And here's the outcome we want. Love it.
And that type of process can be adapted to anything, it sounds like.
Yes. So like in the OR, standardize the setup of the room, the turnover clean, how we do point of use, and how we maintain a sterile field, how we do our timeouts, and then in sterile processing, how we do every piece, like instrumentation and whatnot.
All of the thousands of pieces and steps in that.
Yes.
As we close out this episode, we've covered so much material, and I want to pick your brain on a couple of go and do's. So somebody from the OR or IP, they listen to this episode. What would you recommend they go and do?
You're going to see something and you're going to like, but why are we doing that? And knowledge is power, right? And no one minds people asking questions. Yeah. So go ask questions, make friends, and watch new processes.
And I love that was the go and do, because I think for our listeners who were tuned in to last episode, almost verbatim, the go and do's with Jeremy was go make friends, go build relationships within IP, within the OR, and then learn, ask questions. Curiosity is such a powerful and underutilized tool when we're looking into SSI reduction.
Most certainly. And if you have something, then you're curious about it, explore it. I'll throw a loop in on you that we didn't discuss previously.
Yeah.
I really want someone to finish this research. But I had read something previously, and they were looking at socks as something contributing to SSI because, post-surgical, you're wearing socks, right? Or kettles or anything like that. And you're walking in the halls with it.
True.
And then you're putting them right back on the bed that you're sleeping in and whatnot. And so they had, I guess they cultured the socks and they cultured the floor, and it was very similar in makeup.
Wow.
And so I was like, I really want to see somebody do that research, because that's something that you don't look at. It's something that moves with the patient.
That's true.
And it's become it's in the environment. It's not something that triggers flags. But I just thought that was interesting. It was a couple years ago I read it.
What a great piece of research too. Because that's in real world risk. That's how it goes. Somebody sits on their bed, they put their feet up. Well, the blanket's folded over. So now that portion of the blanket that their feet were just on are now up by their chest where they've got other dressings and, What a cool piece of research. Okay.
Yes. So
Nice.
Garrett, that's your next task.
There we go. Dirty socks. I love it. Well, Crystal, we want to thank you so much for sharing your insight and expertise and really walking us through how to build these relationships in the OR and how to practically improve processes that affect our patients. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
We want to thank Crystal Heishman for sharing her expertise and insights with us on the podcast today, as well as audiences from both transmission control and first case. We'll be back next week with another episode on surgical site infection reduction and how we collaborate between IP and the OR for patient safety. Thanks again for joining us, and remember, infection stops where information starts.
Thanks for tuning in to the Transmission Control Podcast, where infection stops because information starts. If you enjoyed this episode, let us know. Connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating and share this episode with your team. Until next time, stay informed, stay vigilant, and keep transmission under control.